Party.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you for the invitation to participate tonight. A forum like this I find very valuable because not only are they an opportunity for us all to interact with each other, which is actually, from our perspective, my perspective, as important as the ability to contribute. Oh, sorry. Over the last decade, increasing scientific consensus has developed that human activity will contribute to global temperature increases. And what I'm going to put to you tonight is that the Liberal and Coalition government has not waited for this to occur. Over our decade in office, we've put in place substantial programs to address climate change and to promote measures to reduce the impact of our activity on our climate, particularly in relation to energy. Our policy is based on 4 planks: recognising our responsibility to protect the environment for future generations, understanding that climate change poses unique risks to both our economy and our environment, our responsibility to provide technological and policy leadership as one of the world's larger economies and a leading nation in our region, and that our policy responses to reduce greenhouse emissions should come at the lowest possible cost to the Australian community. The Coalition's plan to achieve these planks involves continuing the stimulus to emission reduction technologies through grants to emission reduction facilities and renewables innovation and development, expanding our first mandatory renewable energy target to 30,000 gigawatt hours by 2020, representing around 15% of projected electricity production, introduction of a comprehensive and world's best practice emissions trading scheme, and continuing to work internationally through APEC, the Asia-Pacific Partnership on Clean Development and Climate, and through the UN Framework on Human Rights on climate change to bring about an international agreement that will see all nations set targets and achieve them. Too often the climate change debate has been about symbols rather than substance. In addressing the challenge of greenhouse emissions, real achievements and a track record count for more than slogans and political posturing. Despite such posturing by our opponents, Australia has been a strong performer and a world leader over the past decade. You might not want to hear this. The Coalition government has committed $3.5 billion to climate change initiatives since 1996. Our mandatory renewable target was a world first, as was our dedicated greenhouse office. Our national standalone emissions trading scheme will also be a world first and world's best practice scheme, though it will be designed to fit in with other schemes and not disadvantage the Australian community. Our political opponents may continue to posture, but they cannot refute these real and substantial achievements over the past decade. Symbolism will not succeed in reducing emissions, and symbolic measures that cost Australian jobs and hurt the Australian community will only undermine our longer-term response to this challenge.
Okay, the first question is to Jacinta. It was heartening to hear that the ALP is looking to support real solutions to climate change if elected. And you've come forth with a strong renewable energy target, which is a great step forward. The other side of the coin is where Australia's greenhouse pollution is coming from, and that's overwhelmingly from coal at this point in time, use of coal. You've got a lot of eggs in the clean coal basket. When do you think clean coal will be online? What is clean coal, and will it help us get to the deep cuts in our greenhouse pollution by 2020, which we need to get to if we're going to avoid dangerous climate change?
Okay. On the clean coal issue, thank you for that question. It gives me the opportunity to elaborate on one element of our target. Our target is not based on clean coal. So what advances we may be able to make with investments in that technology is not part of our framework for achieving that target. So while obviously some people in the audience have a concern with coal crime, it needs very much to be highlighted that our newly announced target of 20% by 2020 is not based on what we're suggesting may be able to be achieved by clean coal. However, we think it's important to explore all avenues. And certainly between now and the next 30 to 40 years, when coal is to some degree likely to remain online, we have to maximise the efficiency that we can get out of the current systems in Australia.
You will also have an opportunity to talk further about this particular issue in the next proposition. So thank you for that. Next question.
When's it going to be online? That's part of the question.
In terms of clean coal,
Yeah.
well, this is partly why I'm saying we haven't incorporated it into the target, because some of these advances, they're not realisable at this stage. We can only anticipate what investment might help us achieve. And this is why we haven't factored it into what we think we can say is a strong target without those achievements.
If I could just clarify, I understand that your renewable energy target is just renewable energy, which is fantastic, that it's focused on renewable energy. But the question was the other side of climate change is we need to move towards renewables, but we need to move away from the pollution we're creating.
Yes.
And that pollution is coming from coal. The majority of our pollution is coming from coal at this point, and our use of coal. So that's the flip side of the coin. What is the ALP going to do on the flip side of the coin?
And that's where I'm saying the next proposition is that very question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next.
Thanks very much. My question is for Richard and Lynn. We know that petrol prices are basically going north. I've chosen to...
Sorry, can you speak a bit?
Can you hear? I don't usually get accused of not speaking loudly enough.
First time for everything.
Is that better? Can you all hear me now? All right. Pardon? So my question is for Richard and Lynn. Petrol prices are going north, okay? During the course of this election campaign, it's probably going to hit $100 US a barrel. And yet we're not seeing anything inspirational, if you will, in relation to transport issues being announced during the course of this campaign. As the minor parties in the Senate, who may well possibly have a key role to play in the next term of government, how do you envisage being able, as those parties, to be able to affect policy shifts that actually move away from investment in roads as a transport solution, and looking at fuel efficiency and better public transport options as a way of addressing both supply and demand issues in relation to one aspect of our carbon budget?
Thank you. I put out a press release when the Prime Minister announced that there'd be an extra $10 billion spent on roads as part of the election campaign announcement. As it turns out, some of it is recycled, but nonetheless it does indicate that the government is not taking seriously transport and transport emissions or the cost of fuel. Peak oil, some say, is already upon us, and that's why oil is likely to get to $100 a barrel by the end of this month. So we say that the federal government has for the last 10 years ignored public transport, and that in some ways this is a huge problem, because I actually think the challenge for transport and getting down emissions is much higher than it is for stationary energy. We've all got big cars, we all drive routinely, we have one of the lowest rates of public transport use in the world. And we've built our cities as great sprawling metropolises that are almost impossible to serve by public transport. Not impossible, but almost so. I think we need to move to alternative fuels, but I think that has limited capacity to reduce our emissions, because we can't turn food crops into fuel crops, especially in a climate where there's less rainfall rather than more. So I think there's some scope for biodiesel and ethanol. I think we can use gas as a transition fuel. I had a compressed natural gas dual fuel car a few years ago. One of the problems with having them, though, is that there are no refuelling or any to speak of sites around. I think myself that it's likely that we'll transition in the not too distant future to electric vehicles. The battery designs now are very good, and I drive a Prius, which is part battery, part petrol. But there are now small vehicles being made in the US and Europe, which are both cheap and have a range of about 110 kilometres or so, and are very inexpensive to drive, and that is my prediction for the future.